Elena Whitmore woke up gasping, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Something was wrong. She sat up in the unfamiliar bed, her hands shaking, and looked around the dark room lit only by a sliver of moonlight through the tall window. She was still in the Ashford Palace. She was still trapped. She threw off the blanket and swung her legs over the side of the bed, moving fast, driven by a single thought. She needed to leave tonight. She needed to find her shoes and walk out of this place before the sun rose and before anyone noticed she was gone. Her bare feet touched the cold stone floor as she dropped to her knees and reached under the bed. Nothing. She checked the closet next, pushing aside the few dresses that had been given to her since she arrived 3 weeks ago. Nothing there either. She checked behind the door, under the chair, inside the drawer of the small wooden table. Every single pair of shoes she owned had vanished again. This was the 4th time. Elena pressed her palm against her forehead and tried to steady her breathing. She was not imagining this. She had placed her boots by the door only hours ago, the same boots she had worn since the day she arrived, the only pair sturdy enough to carry her through the forest that surrounded the palace grounds. Now they were gone, just like the sandals before them, just like the soft slippers before that. She had told herself the first time that she must have misplaced them. The second time, she blamed the maids, thinking perhaps someone had taken them to be cleaned without telling her. But by the third time, she knew something else was happening. Someone, or something, did not want her to leave this place. A soft knock came at her door, and Elena froze. She grabbed a shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders before answering. When she opened the door, she found a young boy standing there, no older than 8, wearing a nightshirt far too big for him, his dark hair messy from sleep. "Toby," Elena whispered, surprised. "What are you doing awake?" The boy looked up at her with wide, worried eyes. "I heard you moving around. I thought maybe you were leaving without saying goodbye." Elena's chest tightened. In the short time she had been here, Toby had become the only bright spot in this cold, strange palace. He was an orphan the Alpha King had taken in after his parents died protecting the pack borders, and though the king treated the boy with distant kindness, it was Elena who Toby had grown attached to, following her through the halls, asking her 100 questions a day, sitting with her at meals when no one else would. "I wasn't leaving," she said gently, though it was only half true. "I was looking for my shoes again." Toby's face changed instantly, his eyes darting away from hers. "They're gone again?" "Yes." Elena studied him carefully. "Toby, do you know where they might be?" The boy shook his head quickly, too quickly, and took a step back. "I don't know anything. I should go back to bed." Before Elena could say another word, he turned and hurried down the hallway, his small feet slapping against the stone floor, until he disappeared around the corner. Elena stood in her doorway for a long moment, unsettled by his reaction. He was hiding something. She was almost certain of it now. She closed her door and leaned against it, closing her eyes. 3 weeks ago, she had arrived at this palace with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a debt she did not choose to owe. Her own pack had been destroyed in a raid 2 years earlier, and she had been living on the edges of other territories ever since, taking whatever work she could find, trusting no one, belonging nowhere. When the Alpha King's men found her half-starved on the border of his lands, she expected to be turned away, or worse. Instead, she had been brought before Damon Ashford himself. She remembered that first meeting clearly. He had been sitting on a plain wooden chair, in a room far too large for him, dressed simply, his dark eyes sharp and assessing as he looked her over from head to toe. He did not smile. He barely spoke. He simply said that she could stay in his territory under his protection, in exchange for helping in the kitchens and the herb gardens, until she found somewhere else to go. It had sounded reasonable at the time. A place to sleep, food to eat. Safety from the wolves who roamed the unclaimed lands looking for lone omegas to take advantage of. She had accepted without hesitation. But something had shifted since then. The Alpha King, cold and unreadable at first, had begun watching her in ways she could not explain. He appeared in rooms she was in without warning. He asked about her day when he had no reason to care, and now, ever since she had first mentioned wanting to leave and find a permanent home elsewhere, her shoes kept disappearing. Elena crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed, pulling her knees up to her chest. She thought about the way Damon's eyes sometimes flickered gold, just for a second, before returning to their normal dark brown. She had heard stories about wolves, whose inner beasts sometimes acted on their own, but she had always assumed those stories were exaggerated. Now she was not so sure. The next morning, Elena made her way to the kitchens, as she did every day, tying her hair back and rolling up her sleeves before the head cook, a stout older woman named Grace, handed her a basket of vegetables to prepare. Grace had been kind to her since the beginning, one of the few people in the palace who treated Elena like a person rather than a stranger to be tolerated. "You look tired, dear," Grace said, studying Elena's face as she chopped carrots at the wooden table. "I couldn't find my shoes again," Elena admitted quietly. "This is the 4th time now." Grace's hands paused for just a moment before she continued kneading the dough in front of her. "4th time," she repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "That does seem strange. Do you know anything about it?" Elena asked, watching the older woman's face closely. "I know that palaces have secrets," Grace said simply, "and I know that some secrets are better left alone until they are ready to be found." She glanced up briefly, meeting Elena's eyes with something like sympathy, before turning back to her work. It was not the answer Elena wanted, but she recognized when a conversation had reached its end. She finished her tasks in silence, her mind spinning with questions. Later that afternoon, as she carried a tray of tea toward the private study, where the Alpha King often spent his mornings reviewing reports from his territory, she overheard raised voices coming from inside. She slowed her steps, staying just out of sight near the doorway. "The pup was seen near her room again last night," came the voice of a man Elena recognized as Marcus, the Alpha King's most trusted advisor. "2 of the guards saw him lurking in the hallway before dawn. He was probably just checking on her," Damon's voice replied, though there was an edge to it that Elena had not heard before. "He's grown fond of her." "Fond enough to take her shoes so she cannot leave?" Marcus asked. "Damon, the boy idolizes you. Perhaps he believes he is protecting the pack by keeping her here. Children do strange things when they care about someone." Elena's stomach dropped. They were talking about Toby. "I will speak with him," Damon said, his voice low and heavy. Elena backed away from the door as quietly as she could, her mind racing. Toby. They believed Toby was responsible for hiding her shoes. She remembered his frightened reaction the night before, the way he had refused to look at her, the way he had bolted the moment she asked him directly. Perhaps it was true. Perhaps the boy, desperate not to lose the only person who paid him real attention, had taken matters into his own small hands. But something about it did not sit right with her. Toby was a sweet, gentle child. He did not seem like someone capable of sneaking into her room, night after night, without being caught, especially not with palace guards patrolling the halls at all hours. And there was something else nagging at her thoughts, something about the way Damon's eyes had looked lately, distant and strained, as though he were fighting against something inside himself. She set the tea tray down on a side table in the hallway and hurried away before anyone could catch her listening. That evening, Elena found Toby sitting alone in the small garden behind the kitchens, tossing pebbles into the fountain, his shoulders hunched. "Toby," she said softly, sitting down beside him on the stone bench. "I heard that some of the guards saw you near my room last night." The boy's pebble missed the fountain entirely and clattered against the stone edge. He did not look at her. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." "I never said you were," Elena said gently. "But if you know something about my shoes, you can tell me. I promise I won't be angry." Toby's chin trembled, and for a moment, Elena thought he might cry. "The king is going to be angry with me," he whispered. "He already yelled at me this morning. He said I have been sneaking around and causing trouble, and that if it happens again there will be real punishment." Elena's heart ached for him. "Did he yell at you because of the shoes?" Toby nodded, staring down at his hands. "But I didn't take them. I promise I didn't. I was in the hallway last night because I heard something strange, like footsteps that didn't sound like a person's footsteps. I got scared, and I hid behind the tapestry near your door until it went away." Elena went very still. "What did the footsteps sound like?" "Like an animal," Toby said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Heavy and fast, with claws clicking on the stone. I thought it might be a wild wolf that got into the palace, so I didn't move until it was gone. Then I heard your door, and I got even more scared, so I just went back to my room." Elena's mind flew back to what Grace had said in the kitchen, and to the strange gold flicker she had noticed in Damon's eyes more than once. A heavy animal, with claws on the stone floor, not a person's footsteps at all. "Toby," she said carefully, "have you ever seen the king's wolf? His actual wolf form?" The boy shook his head. "No one has, not for a long time. Marcus says the king doesn't shift anymore because something is wrong between him and his wolf. The older guards whisper about it sometimes when they think I'm not listening." Elena sat back, her thoughts spinning faster than ever. If Damon's wolf was somehow acting on its own, separate from the king's control, then perhaps the wolf itself was responsible for the missing shoes. Not Toby at all, and not even Damon in his human mind. But why would a wolf care about hiding someone's shoes? Unless it was trying to keep her here for a reason the wolf understood, but the man did not yet accept. "Toby, listen to me," Elena said, taking his small hand in hers. "I don't think you did anything wrong, and I am going to make sure the king understands that. Can you do something for me? If you hear those footsteps again, don't hide. Come find me immediately, no matter what time it is. Can you do that?" Toby looked up at her, some of the fear in his eyes replaced with hope. "You believe me?" "I believe you," Elena said firmly. "And I am going to find out exactly what has been happening in this palace, even if I have to stay awake every single night to do it." As the two of them sat together in the fading evening light, Elena felt a new determination settle over her. She had come to this palace as a stranger with nothing, expecting to leave the moment she found somewhere safer to go. But now there was a frightened little boy being blamed for something he did not do, and a mystery involving the Alpha King's own wolf that no one seemed willing to explain to her directly. She was not leaving, not yet, not until she uncovered the truth. That night, Elena did not sleep. She sat in the corner of her room in the dark, wrapped in a blanket, watching the door and listening for any sound in the hallway beyond. The palace grew quiet around midnight, the last of the servants retiring to their quarters, the guards settling into their long, silent watches along the outer walls. Hours passed. Elena's eyes grew heavy more than once, but she forced herself to stay alert, thinking of Toby's frightened face and the unfair blame resting on his small shoulders. She would not let this continue. It was nearly 2 in the morning when she finally heard it. A soft sound outside her door, careful and deliberate, unlike anything a person walking on 2 feet would make. Her whole body tensed. She rose slowly from her chair and crept toward the door, careful not to make a single sound of her own. She reached for the handle, her hand trembling slightly, and pulled the door open just a crack. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. A massive dark wolf stood just a few feet away in the dim hallway, its fur nearly black in the low light, its eyes glowing a deep amber that seemed almost familiar. In its jaws, held gently but firmly, was one of Elena's boots. Elena's first instinct was fear, and she froze completely, not daring to breathe. But as she looked closer, something about the wolf's posture made her pause. It was not aggressive. It was not baring its teeth or preparing to attack. Instead, it seemed almost nervous, its ears pressed slightly back, its tail low but not tucked in submission or fear. It simply stood there, watching her, the boot still held carefully in its mouth, as though it had been caught doing something it should not have been doing. "Damon?" Elena whispered, hardly believing the word as it left her mouth. The wolf's ears perked up at the sound of the name, and its amber eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. It took a slow step backward, as if uncertain whether to run or stay. "I know it's you," Elena said, keeping her voice low and steady, even though her heart was racing. "Please, just talk to me, or however it is that you communicate like this. I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to scream." The wolf tilted its head, studying her for a long moment. Then, slowly, it set the boot down on the floor between them and stepped back again, watching her reaction carefully. Elena knelt down and picked up the boot, turning it over in her hands. It was perfectly intact, not a single tooth mark on the leather, as though it had been carried with the greatest care rather than simply grabbed and dragged away. She looked back up at the wolf. "Why do you keep taking my shoes?" she asked softly. "Toby has been getting blamed for this, and he is just a child. He didn't do anything wrong, and now he's scared and hurt because of it." The wolf's amber eyes flickered at the mention of Toby's name, and for a moment, it looked almost pained, its head dropping slightly. Elena felt a strange wave of sympathy toward the creature in front of her, despite everything. "Can you understand me?" she asked. The wolf nodded, a small, deliberate movement of its great head that left no doubt in Elena's mind. It understood every word. "Then please," Elena said, "tell Damon, or tell yourself, or whoever is in control right now, that this needs to stop. Not just because of my shoes, but because an innocent child is being punished for something he never did." The wolf lowered itself slowly to the ground, its body curling in a way that reminded Elena of shame, or perhaps regret. It stayed like that for several long seconds before rising again, and backing further down the hallway, its eyes never leaving hers, until it turned a corner and vanished into the shadows. Elena stood in her doorway for a long time afterward, clutching her boot to her chest, her mind racing with everything she had just witnessed. The Alpha King's wolf had a mind of its own, separate enough from the man himself that it could act without his full awareness or control. And that wolf, for reasons she still did not understand, seemed determined to keep her from leaving this palace. She thought about the flickers of gold she had seen in Damon's eyes during the day, moments when his composed expression seemed to crack for just an instant before he regained control. Perhaps those were the moments when his wolf pushed closest to the surface, fighting against whatever barrier kept it separated from full control. The next morning, Elena did not go straight to the kitchens. Instead, she made her way toward the private wing of the palace, where the Alpha King kept his study, determined to speak with him directly, before another day passed, and another false accusation fell on Toby's shoulders. She found Marcus first, standing outside the study door with a stack of papers in his arms, his expression tightening slightly when he saw her approach. "I need to speak with the king," Elena said firmly. "He is occupied with pack matters this morning," Marcus replied, though something in his tone suggested he was choosing his words carefully. "Perhaps another time." "This cannot wait," Elena insisted. "It concerns Toby, and it concerns something I saw last night that I believe the king needs to know about immediately." Marcus studied her for a long moment, his sharp eyes searching her face, as though trying to determine exactly how much she knew. Finally, he nodded and stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. "He will see you," Marcus said. "But be careful with your words, Elena. There are things happening within this palace that are more complicated than they appear on the surface." Elena thanked him, and pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, Damon sat behind his desk, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he had slept as little as she had the night before. He looked up as she entered, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not quite name before his usual guarded expression settled back into place. "Elena," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "is something wrong?" "You know exactly what is wrong," Elena said, closing the door behind her and stepping further into the room. "I saw your wolf last night, in the hallway outside my room, holding one of my boots in its mouth." Damon's entire body went rigid. He set down the pen he had been holding, his knuckles whitening slightly against the wood of the desk. "That is not possible," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I have full control over my shifts." "I would know if I had shifted last night." "Would you?" Elena asked, moving closer. "Because from where I stood, your wolf seemed to be acting entirely on its own, separate from whatever you are aware of during the day. It understood every word I said to it. It responded to Toby's name, and it looked, Damon, it looked almost guilty, like it knew exactly what it was doing was wrong but could not stop itself." Damon rose from his chair and turned toward the window, his back to her, his shoulders tense. For a long moment, he said nothing at all, and Elena waited, giving him the space to process what she had told him. "There have been nights," he finally said, his voice low, "when I wake up and find myself standing somewhere I did not intend to be, with no memory of how I got there. I assumed it was simply exhaustion, or perhaps stress from managing the pack alone since my father died. I did not want to believe my wolf was acting independently. That kind of separation between a wolf and his human mind is rare, and it is usually a sign that something is deeply wrong. Toby is being blamed for something you have been doing without even realizing it," Elena said, her voice firm but not unkind. "He is terrified of you right now. He thinks you are angry with him for something he never did." Damon turned back to face her, and the guilt in his eyes was unmistakable. "I yelled at him yesterday morning," he admitted quietly. "I told him if it happened again, there would be consequences. I truly believed he was responsible. You need to fix that, Elena said. Today, he looks up to you more than anyone else in this palace, and right now he believes he has disappointed you. Damon nodded slowly, his jaw tightening with resolve. I will speak with him immediately, and I will make sure he understands the truth is not his fault. He paused, studying Elena carefully. But I need to understand why my wolf would do this. Why would it want to keep you here badly enough to act against my own will? Elena felt her cheeks warm slightly under his gaze, though she was not entirely sure why. I don't know, she said honestly. But perhaps it is time you found out, before something worse happens because of it. Damon held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, before he finally nodded and moved toward the door, ready to make things right with the boy who had unfairly carried the weight of his mistake. Toby was sitting alone at the edge of the training yard when Damon found him, his knees pulled up to his chest, watching the older warriors practice their sparring drills from a safe distance. He flinched slightly when he noticed the king approaching, his small body curling in on itself even further. Damon lowered himself to sit on the ground beside the boy, an act so unusual for the Alpha King that several of the warriors in the yard paused their sparring to glance over in surprise, before quickly returning to their drills. Toby, Damon said quietly, I owe you an apology. The boy's head turned slowly, his eyes wide with disbelief. An apology? I was wrong to blame you for the missing shoes, Damon continued, his voice steady despite the discomfort clearly written across his face. I spoke to Elena this morning, and I have reason to believe the truth is far more complicated than either of us realized. It was not you, Toby. I should never have raised my voice at you the way I did. Toby's lower lip trembled, and to Damon's surprise, the boy launched himself forward and wrapped his small arms around the king's middle in a tight hug. Damon sat stiffly for a moment, unused to such open displays of affection, before slowly returning the embrace, one large hand resting gently on the boy's back. I thought you hated me, Toby mumbled into his shirt. I could never hate you, Damon said firmly. You remind me of myself at your age, and I have failed to show you the patience you deserve. That will change, starting today. When Toby finally pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve, there was a new lightness in his expression that had been missing since the accusations began. Damon rose to his feet and offered the boy a hand, pulling him up alongside him. Come, Damon said. I believe Grace has fresh bread waiting in the kitchen, and I think we both deserve a decent breakfast after the week we've had. As they walked together back toward the palace, Damon found his thoughts circling back to Elena's words. His wolf, acting independently, taking her shoes without his knowledge or consent. It was a troubling thought on its own, but it raised an even more troubling question underneath it. Why would his wolf care so deeply about keeping one particular Omega within these walls? He had heard the old stories, of course. Every wolf shifter grew up hearing about fated mates, that rare and powerful bond that some wolves were fortunate enough to find, where the wolf recognized its other half long before the human mind caught up to the truth. His own parents had shared such a bond, and he remembered as a child watching the way his father's eyes would soften whenever his mother entered a room, the way the two of them seemed to move through the world, as though connected by an invisible thread. But Damon had convinced himself long ago that such bonds were not meant for him. After the betrayal that had cost him nearly everything 3 years earlier, when the woman he had once trusted completely turned out to be working against his pack from the very beginning, he had closed himself off entirely from the idea of ever trusting anyone that deeply again. He had built walls around his heart so thick and so high that he assumed even his own wolf had accepted the isolation as permanent. Perhaps he had been wrong. That afternoon, Elena found herself in the herb garden behind the kitchens, kneeling in the soil as she carefully pulled weeds from around the rows of mint and rosemary. It was work she had grown to enjoy over the past 3 weeks, the quiet rhythm of it giving her mind space to think, and today, she had a great deal to think about. You look deep in thought, came a familiar voice, and Elena looked up to find Grace approaching with a basket balanced on her hip. Oh, I saw the king's wolf last night, Elena admitted, deciding there was little point in hiding it from a woman who clearly already knew more than she let on. It was holding my boot. It understood everything I said to it. Grace set down her basket and lowered herself onto the wooden bench nearby with a small sigh, as though she had been waiting for this conversation for quite some time. I wondered when you would see him, she said. I have worked in this palace for over 20 years, dear. I remember when Damon was just a boy running through these very gardens with his parents watching from that window up there. She pointed toward a second-story window overlooking the garden. His mother and father shared a bond so strong that even after all these years, the older guards still speak of it with a kind of reverence. Do you think that's what this is? Elena asked carefully. A bond? Between Damon's wolf and me? I think, Grace said slowly, that wolves do not concern themselves with hiding the shoes of someone they feel nothing for. And I think that young man has been alone in his heart for far too long, ever since that terrible business with Victoria. Elena's ears perked up at the unfamiliar name. Who is Victoria? Grace's expression darkened slightly. That is a story for Damon to tell, if he chooses to. It is not mine to share. But I will say this much, dear. Whatever walls that man has built around himself, he built them for good reason, and it will take more than a few missing shoes to bring them down entirely. Elena sat with that thought for the rest of the afternoon, turning it over in her mind as she finished her work in the garden. She had noticed the guarded way Damon carried himself since the day they met, the careful distance he kept even in moments of kindness, as though he were perpetually bracing for some kind of betrayal. Now she understood there was likely a reason behind it, a wound from the past that had never fully healed. She was still thinking about it that evening when she made her way to the dining hall for the evening meal, only to find Damon already seated at the long table, Toby beside him looking happier than Elena had seen him in days. The boy waved her over enthusiastically, patting the seat beside him. The king apologized to me, Toby announced proudly, as Elena took her seat. He said it wasn't my fault at all. I'm glad to hear that, Elena said, glancing toward Damon, who met her eyes with something that looked almost like gratitude. Thank you, he said quietly, for her ears alone, as Toby launched into an animated retelling of his day to Grace, who had joined them at the table, for pushing me to make things right with him. He deserved better than what happened, Elena said simply. Children shouldn't carry the weight of adult mistakes. Damon nodded, his expression thoughtful. I would like to speak with you further, after the meal, if you're willing, about everything you told me this morning. Elena agreed, and once the meal ended and Toby had been sent off to bed under Grace's watchful supervision, she followed Damon to a quiet sitting room near his study, where a small fire crackled in the hearth against the evening chill. I need to tell you something, Damon began once they were both seated, about my past, and about why the idea of a bond terrifies me more than most things in this world. Elena stayed silent, giving him the space to continue at his own pace. 3 years ago, before my father passed and left me to lead this pack alone, I met a woman named Victoria, Damon said, his voice carefully measured, as though he had rehearsed this explanation many times, without ever actually speaking it aloud. She came to our territory claiming to be fleeing a violent situation in her own pack, much like you did. I believed her completely. I let her into my life, into my confidence, and eventually, I believed I was falling in love with her. He paused, staring into the fire for a long moment before continuing. It turned out she had been sent by a rival pack leader to gather information about our defenses, our alliances, everything that would help him plan an eventual takeover of our territory. By the time we discovered the truth, she had already caused significant damage, weakening trust between us and 2 of our closest allied packs. My father managed to repair most of the damage before he passed, but the experience left me deeply unwilling to trust anyone who claims to need my protection ever again. That's why you've kept your distance from me, Elena said quietly, understanding dawning. I told myself I was simply being cautious, Damon admitted. But when Marcus mentioned the possibility that my wolf recognized you as something more than just another stranger seeking shelter, my first instinct was fear. Fear that I was being deceived again, or fear that even if it were true, I would ruin it the same way I ruined things before, by not trusting my own judgment. Elena considered his words carefully. I understand why you would be afraid, she said, but I am not Victoria. I have no pack sending me here, no hidden agenda. Nothing to gain from deceiving you. I came to your territory because I had nowhere else to go, and I have stayed because Toby needed someone, and because despite everything, this is the first place in 2 years that has felt even remotely like safety. Damon looked at her then, with an intensity that made her breath catch slightly. I believe you, he said softly. And that frightens me more than anything Victoria ever did. Why? Elena asked. Because believing you means opening myself up to the possibility of being hurt again, Damon said. And because if my wolf truly has recognized you as its fated mate, then the stakes are far higher than anything I experienced before. This is not simply a matter of trust between two people. It is a bond that, once fully formed, cannot be undone. Elena felt a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her, uncertainty and curiosity, and something warmer that she was not quite ready to name. What happens now? She asked. Now, Damon said, I believe we need to figure out exactly what my wolf intends, and why it feels the need to act so desperately to keep you here. Because whatever is happening, it clearly believes the stakes are high enough to defy my own conscious will, and that has never happened to me before in my entire life. Outside the window, the moon rose higher over the palace grounds, casting silver light across the training yards where Toby had sat earlier that day, across the herb garden where Elena had spent the afternoon thinking, and across the long stone hallways where a great dark wolf had once stood, clutching a single boot in its jaws, torn between instinct and restraint, desperate to keep something precious from slipping away. Neither Damon nor Elena knew yet just how much more complicated the coming days would become, or how close they were to uncovering a truth that would change everything between them. The following morning, Damon sent word to old Winifred, the pack's healer and keeper of ancient wolf lore, asking her to come to the palace as soon as she was able. Winifred lived in a small cottage at the edge of the territory, far enough from the main grounds that few people visited her unless they had a genuine need, and Damon had not sought her counsel in years. She arrived by midday, a small, wiry woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight braid, and eyes so pale they seemed almost colorless. She greeted Damon with a respectful nod, before her sharp gaze shifted immediately to Elena, studying her with an intensity that made Elena feel as though the old woman could see straight through to her bones. So, Winifred said, settling into a chair in the small sitting room, the wolf has finally found her. Damon's shoulders tensed. You knew? I suspected, Winifred corrected. I felt a shift in the air around this palace weeks ago, not long after word reached me that a lone Omega had been taken in. These things have a way of announcing themselves, even to those of us who are no longer young enough to shift ourselves. She turned her attention fully to Elena. Tell me, child, have you felt anything unusual since arriving here? A pull, perhaps, or a warmth when the king is near? Elena thought back over the past 3 weeks, and though she had dismissed it at the time as simple nervousness around a powerful stranger, she realized now that there had indeed been something more. A strange awareness whenever Damon entered a room, a warmth that spread through her chest when their eyes met, feelings she had attributed to fear or unfamiliarity, but that now seemed to carry a different weight entirely. I suppose I have, Elena admitted quietly. Winifred nodded, unsurprised. The bond is forming, though it is not yet complete. A wolf recognizes its mate, long before the human mind is ready to accept the truth, and in cases where the human side resists too strongly, the wolf may act on instinct alone, attempting to secure what it knows to be precious, even without permission from its own conscious counterpart. She looked pointedly at Damon. This is what has been happening with the shoes, I imagine. Yes, Damon said, his jaw tight. My wolf has been shifting without my knowledge, and hiding Elena's shoes so she cannot leave the territory. A rather clumsy method, but an effective one, Winifred said, with the faintest hint of amusement. Wolves are simple creatures at their core, Damon. When we deny our instincts too forcefully, they find other ways to make themselves known. How do we stop it? Damon asked. Not the bond itself, necessarily, but this separation between my wolf and my own will. It is dangerous, Winifred. I cannot lead this pack effectively, if I am losing time and control without realizing it. Winifred considered this for a long moment. The separation exists because you have been suppressing your wolf's instincts for years, ever since the incident with Victoria. Your wolf wanted to trust her too, and when that trust was betrayed, you built walls not only around your heart, but around your connection to your own nature. Your wolf has been starved of the closeness it craves, and now that it has found something worth fighting for, it refuses to remain caged any longer. So I need to trust it again, Damon said slowly. Trust myself again. And trust her, Winifred added, nodding toward Elena. The bond cannot fully form, and your wolf cannot fully settle, until both of you choose it freely, with open eyes and open hearts. Until then, expect more of these instinctive acts, and understand that they will likely grow stronger, rather than weaker, the longer the bond remains unacknowledged. Elena felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest at those words. Stronger. What did that mean, exactly? As if reading her thoughts, Winifred turned to her once more. You should know, child, that a wolf denied its mate for too long can become reckless in its attempts to secure her. Taking shoes is a mild expression of that instinct. Left unaddressed, it could escalate into something far more disruptive to daily life, though I do not believe Damon's wolf means any true harm. It simply does not yet trust that Elena will stay by any means other than instinctive intervention. Damon looked stricken by this information, his hands clenching briefly at his sides before he forced himself to relax. Thank you, Winifred. I appreciate your honesty, difficult as it is to hear. Difficult truths are usually the most important ones, Winifred said, rising from her chair. I will leave the two of you to consider what you've learned, but do not wait too long to decide, either of you. Bonds left in limbo rarely resolve themselves gently. After the old healer departed, Elena and Damon sat in silence for a long while, both absorbing the weight of everything they had just learned. Elena was the first to speak. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted honestly. 3 weeks ago, I was a stranger with nowhere to go, and now I'm being told that your wolf considers me its fated mate, and that if we don't figure this out, things could get worse before they get better. I understand the uncertainty, Damon said. Believe me, I am struggling with it as well, but I want you to know that whatever happens, I will not force this bond upon you. If you decide, after everything, that leaving is truly what you want, I will find a way to make peace with that, even if it means finding a way to control my wolf through sheer will alone. Elena appreciated the honesty in his words, the lack of pressure or expectation. It was different from anything she had experienced in her 2 years of wandering from place to place, always aware that her safety depended on the goodwill of others, always bracing for the moment that goodwill might run out. Here, at least, was a man willing to give her a genuine choice. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching, and moments later Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. Damon, he said without preamble, a messenger has arrived from Victor's territory. He requests an audience with you immediately. Elena watched as all the warmth drained from Damon's face, replaced by a hardened expression she had not seen from him before. Victor, he repeated, the name carrying obvious weight. What could he possibly want after all this time? The messenger would not say, Marcus replied. But he insisted the matter was urgent, and that Victor expects a response within the week. Damon rose from his seat, his posture straightening into something more commanding, more clearly the leader of an entire territory, rather than the uncertain man who had been discussing matters of the heart only moments before. Bring the messenger to the main hall, he said. I will hear what Victor has to say. As Marcus hurried off to relay the instructions, Damon turned back to Elena, his expression apologetic. Victor is the pack leader who sent Victoria to deceive us 3 years ago. If he is reaching out now, it is unlikely to be for friendly reasons. Elena felt a chill run through her at the mention of the name, the same name Grace had refused to elaborate on the day before. Whatever history existed between Damon and this rival leader, it seemed the past was not content to remain buried, and Elena had the growing suspicion that the coming days would test not only the fragile bond forming between herself and Damon, but the entire stability of the territory they now called home. I should come with you, Elena said, rising to her feet as well. Damon hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to protect her from whatever news awaited them, and recognizing that she deserved to understand the dangers surrounding the place she had chosen, for now, to stay in. Finally he nodded. Stay close to me, he said, and be prepared. Victor is not a man who deals in honest intentions. Together, they made their way toward the main hall, unaware that the messenger's arrival would set into motion a chain of events far more dangerous than a missing pair of shoes. Events that would test the fragile trust building between them, and force both Damon and his long-suppressed wolf to confront the very fears that had kept them apart for so long. The main hall was already filling with pack warriors by the time Damon and Elena arrived. word having spread quickly that a messenger from Victor's territory had come uninvited. Marcus stood near the raised platform at the front of the room, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed on a tall, thin man, dressed in dark traveling clothes who waited near the entrance, flanked by two silent guards of his own. Damon strode forward with an authority that seemed to fill the entire room, and Elena followed close behind, keenly aware of the curious glances directed her way by the assembled warriors. She had never seen this side of Damon before, the commanding presence that made even seasoned fighters straighten their shoulders as he passed. "You may speak," Damon said, taking his place on the raised platform, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. The messenger stepped forward and bowed slightly, though there was little genuine respect in the gesture. "My master, Victor Alden, sends his regards to the Ashford territory," he began, his tone smooth and practiced. "He wishes to propose a formal alliance between our two packs, to be sealed through a marriage between himself and a suitable Omega of your choosing, as a gesture of goodwill, following the unfortunate misunderstandings of years past." A ripple of murmurs passed through the assembled crowd. Damon's expression remained carefully neutral, though Elena could see the tension building in the set of his shoulders. "Victor sent a spy into my territory 3 years ago," Damon said evenly. "That is not a misunderstanding. That is betrayal. Why would I consider any alliance with a man who has already demonstrated his willingness to deceive us?" "My master wishes to make amends," the messenger replied smoothly. "He recognizes the damage caused by past actions and hopes that a union between our packs might restore the trust that was broken. He specifically requested that if there happens to be an unmated Omega currently residing within your territory, she might be considered as a candidate for this alliance." Elena felt her blood run cold. Somehow, word of her presence in the Ashford territory had already reached Victor's ears, and now he was proposing that she be handed over to him as part of some political arrangement, as though she were property to be traded, rather than a person with her own will and choices. Beside her, she felt Damon's entire body go rigid, and when she glanced at him, she saw his eyes flash gold for just an instant, before he forced them back to their normal dark brown, through what appeared to be sheer force of will. "There is no Omega in this territory, available for such an arrangement," Damon said, his voice tight with restrained anger. "You may relay that message back to your master, along with my firm rejection of any alliance built on such terms." The messenger's eyes flicked briefly toward Elena, a calculating gleam passing across his face before he schooled his expression back into polite neutrality. "I see," he said. "My master will be disappointed to hear this, but I will relay your response as instructed." He bowed once more, a shallow, insincere gesture, before turning and departing the hall with his guards close behind. The moment the doors closed behind the messenger, the tension in the room seemed to shatter, and murmurs erupted among the gathered warriors. Damon raised a hand for silence, and the hall quieted immediately. "This meeting is concluded," he announced. "Return to your duties. I will address any further developments as they arise." As the crowd dispersed, Elena found herself standing beside Damon on the platform, her heart still pounding from the exchange. "He knows about me," she said quietly, once they were alone enough to speak privately. "It would seem so," Damon replied, his jaw tight. "Victor has spies everywhere, even now. He likely learned of your presence within days of your arrival, and he has been waiting for the right moment to make his move." "What does he actually want?" Elena asked. "Surely not simply an alliance built on marriage to a stranger." "Victor wants territory," Damon said grimly. "He has wanted to expand his influence into these lands for years, ever since my father refused to grant him passage rights through our borders. A marriage alliance would give him a legitimate claim to influence within my pack, a foothold he could use to slowly undermine my authority from within. It is exactly the kind of scheme Victoria was originally sent to accomplish, and now he is attempting a more direct approach." Elena felt a wave of unease settle over her. "And he wants me specifically because I'm here, unattached, with no pack of my own to object." "Precisely," Damon said, "which means we need to move carefully from this point forward. If Victor believes there is any possibility of claiming you for his own purposes, he may attempt more aggressive measures than simply sending a messenger." That night, sleep proved elusive for Elena once again, though this time her wakefulness had nothing to do with missing shoes, and everything to do with the weight of everything she had learned. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the messenger's words over and over in her mind, until finally she rose and made her way to the small balcony attached to her room, seeking the cool night air to clear her thoughts. She had not been standing there long when she heard a soft sound behind her, and turned to find Damon's wolf standing in the doorway of her room, having apparently entered through the door she had left slightly ajar. This time, Elena felt no fear at all, only a strange sense of familiarity as the great dark creature approached her slowly, its amber eyes fixed on her face. "You heard everything today, didn't you?" she said softly, not really expecting an answer beyond acknowledgement. The wolf lowered its head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost like confirmation, before it moved closer and settled down beside her on the balcony floor, its large body curling protectively near her feet. Elena knelt down slowly and reached out a tentative hand, resting it gently on the wolf's thick fur. She half expected it to pull away, but instead it leaned into her touch, a low sound rumbling in its chest that reminded her, oddly, of contentment. "I'm not going anywhere," Elena murmured, more to herself than to the wolf, though she suspected it understood every word regardless. "Not with Victor threatening this territory, and not with everything Damon and I are still figuring out. You don't need to hide my shoes anymore." The wolf's ears twitched at this, and it lifted its head to meet her eyes directly, an intensity in its gaze that made Elena's breath catch slightly. There was something deeply intelligent behind those amber eyes, something that felt distinctly like Damon despite the different form. They stayed like that for a long while, Elena sitting quietly, with her hand resting on the wolf's back, both of them watching the moon traverse slowly across the night sky. Eventually, exhaustion began to pull at Elena's eyes, and she found herself leaning against the wolf's warm side, her eyelids growing heavy. She must have drifted off at some point, because when she next opened her eyes, morning light was streaming through her window, and she was tucked into her own bed, a blanket pulled carefully over her, with no sign of the wolf anywhere in the room. Someone, presumably Damon in whatever form, had carried her back inside and made sure she was comfortable before departing. When she made her way to the kitchens that morning, she found Damon already there, looking exhausted, but somehow lighter than she had seen him in days, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth when their eyes met. "You remember last night," Elena said, more statement than question. "I remember all of it," Damon confirmed. "For the first time since this began, I was aware and present the entire time my wolf took control. It seems that the more honestly we communicate, the stronger the connection between my human mind and my wolf's instincts becomes." "That's good, isn't it?" Elena asked. "It's very good," Damon said, his expression softening. "Winifred was right. Trust is the key to healing the separation. And last night, sitting with you on that balcony, I felt more whole than I have in 3 years." Elena felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words, though the looming threat of Victor's ambitions still cast a shadow over the moment. "We still need to figure out how to handle Victor," she reminded him gently. "I know," Damon said, his expression turning serious once more, "and I promise you, whatever comes next, I will not allow him to use you as a pawn in his schemes. But for now, let us take comfort in the progress we've made, even as we prepare for whatever challenges lie ahead." Little did either of them know that Victor was not a man accustomed to accepting rejection gracefully, and that his next move would arrive far sooner, and far more dangerously, than either of them anticipated. 3 days passed quietly after the messenger's departure, quiet enough that Elena began to hope Victor might simply abandon his scheme after such a firm rejection. She spent her mornings in the herb garden as usual, her afternoons helping Grace in the kitchens, and her evenings increasingly in Damon's company, the two of them slowly learning to navigate the strange new territory of trust and affection neither had expected to find. But the peace was not meant to last. It was Owen, one of the senior warriors responsible for patrolling the eastern border, who first raised the alarm. He arrived at the palace in a hurry one afternoon, dust still clinging to his boots from the ride, and requested an urgent audience with Damon and Marcus. "We caught someone attempting to cross into our territory near the old mill," Owen reported, once he had been shown into Damon's study. "A young woman, traveling alone, claiming to be seeking refuge much like Elena did weeks ago. But something about her story did not sit right with my patrol, so we brought her in for questioning, rather than turning her away or granting immediate entry. "What makes you suspicious of her?" Damon asked. "She knew details about our territory that a genuine stranger would have no reason to know," Owen said. "The location of our eastern watchtowers, the timing of our patrol rotations, even mentioned Elena by name before any of us had said a word about her." Damon's expression darkened considerably. "Bring her to the interrogation chamber. I will speak with her myself." Elena, who had been present for part of this exchange after arriving to bring tea, felt a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Another woman, claiming refuge, somehow already aware of details she should not know. It sounded uncomfortably similar to the story of Victoria that Damon had shared with her only days before. "You think Victor sent her?" Elena said once Owen had departed to retrieve the captured woman. "I think it is highly likely," Damon said grimly. "If she cannot secure you through a proposed marriage, perhaps Victor believes he can gather information about you instead, learn your history, find some leverage he can use against either of us." The interrogation, when it took place, revealed exactly what Damon had suspected. The young woman, after significant pressure and the clear evidence stacked against her, eventually admitted that she had indeed been sent by Victor to gather intelligence about the territory's defenses, and, more specifically, about the Omega recently taken in by the Alpha King. She claimed not to know the full extent of Victor's plans beyond simple information gathering, though Damon remained skeptical of how much she was truly willing to reveal. News of the captured spy spread through the palace quickly, and by evening, whispers had begun circulating among the staff and warriors alike. Elena felt the shift in atmosphere almost immediately, the sideways glances that followed her through the hallways, the way conversations seemed to quiet slightly whenever she entered a room. It came to a head that evening, when she overheard two of the younger warriors speaking in hushed tones near the training yard as she passed by, their words carrying further than they perhaps intended. "First Victoria, now this spy, and both times connected somehow to whatever Omega happens to be staying in the palace," one of them muttered. "Makes you wonder if there's a pattern worth paying attention to." "You think Elena might be working with Victor too?" the other asked, his voice hushed, but not hushed enough. Elena's stomach twisted painfully, and she hurried past before they noticed her, her cheeks burning with a mixture of hurt and indignation. She had done nothing to earn such suspicion, yet the mere coincidence of timing and circumstance was enough to plant doubt in the minds of people who barely knew her. She found Grace in the kitchen later, her hands trembling slightly as she recounted what she had overheard. "They think I might be involved with Victor somehow," she said, her voice unsteady. "After everything, after weeks of proving myself, one spy shows up, and suddenly I'm a suspect all over again." Grace set down the bread she had been kneading and wrapped Elena in a firm, comforting hug. "Fear makes people foolish, dear," she said. "This pack has been burned once before, and old wounds make people quick to see threats even where none exist. Give it time. The truth has a way of revealing itself, and Damon knows you well enough by now to see through any baseless suspicion." But the doubt had already been planted, and Elena found herself increasingly aware of the whispers and glances that seemed to follow her wherever she went over the next 2 days. Even Marcus, usually courteous if reserved, seemed to regard her with a new wariness that stung more than she cared to admit. Damon, for his part, remained steadfast in his trust of her, but Elena could see the strain the situation placed on him as well, torn between reassuring her and managing the growing unease among his pack members. The captured spy remained imprisoned within the palace, while Damon decided how best to proceed, and each day that passed without resolution seemed to deepen the suspicion hanging over Elena like a shadow she could not shake. It was Toby, surprisingly, who articulated the unfairness of the situation most clearly one evening as the three of them sat together after supper. "It's not fair," the boy said, his small face scrunched with indignation. "Elena didn't do anything wrong. Just because someone else lied about being a refugee doesn't mean she's lying too. That's like saying I stole the shoes just because I was standing near the door." Damon and Elena exchanged a glance at the boy's simple but pointed observation, and Damon reached over to ruffle Toby's hair affectionately. "You are wiser than most grown men in this palace," he said. "You're right. Suspicion built on coincidence rather than evidence helps no one, and I intend to address it directly." The following morning, Damon called an assembly of his senior warriors and household staff, Elena standing beside him despite her nervousness at being the center of such attention once again. "I am aware," Damon began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, "that some among you have begun to question Elena's presence within this territory, drawing connections between her and the recent attempt at espionage by Victor's agent. I want to address this directly and put these concerns to rest." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the gathered faces before continuing. "Elena arrived in this territory, starving and alone, having lost her own pack to violence 2 years prior. She has worked honestly in our kitchens and gardens every day since her arrival, has shown nothing but kindness to every member of this household, including young Toby, who she defended fiercely, even when others were quick to place blame unfairly upon him. The timing of Victor's interest in her is not evidence of collusion. It is evidence that Victor is a desperate man, seeking any advantage he can find, including attempting to sow discord and suspicion within my own pack through rumor alone." Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, at the unwavering conviction in his voice, the public defense she had not expected but desperately needed. "Any further baseless suspicion directed at Elena," Damon continued, his tone firming with authority, "will be treated as a direct challenge to my judgment as your Alpha King. I trust her. That should be sufficient for the rest of you." A murmur passed through the crowd, but no one dared voice further objection in the face of such a clear declaration. As the assembly dispersed, Elena turned to Damon, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "You needed no thanks," Damon replied. "You have proven your character every single day since your arrival. It was long past time I made that clear to everyone else as well." But even as the immediate suspicion began to fade among the pack members, Elena could not shake the feeling that Victor's next move would be far more direct than a mere spy sent to gather information, and that the true test of everything they had built together still lay ahead of them. A full week passed following Damon's public declaration of trust, and the atmosphere within the palace gradually returned to something resembling normalcy. Elena noticed the whispers fading, replaced by the same warm familiarity she had grown accustomed to over her weeks in the territory. Even Marcus had softened toward her considerably, going so far as to seek her opinion on a matter of pack supplies one afternoon, a small gesture that meant more to Elena than he likely realized. It was during this fragile calm that Elena and Damon finally allowed themselves to acknowledge openly what had been building between them since the very first night his wolf appeared outside her door. Their conversations grew longer, their shared glances more frequent, and one evening, as they walked together along the palace walls watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Damon finally took her hand in his. "I know we have not known each other long," he said, his voice carrying a vulnerability she had rarely heard from him, "but I find myself unable to imagine my days without your presence in them anymore. Whatever this bond is, whatever my wolf recognized in you from the very beginning, I find that my own heart has come to agree with its instincts entirely." Elena felt warmth spreading through her chest, chasing away the lingering doubts that had followed her for 2 years of wandering without a place to truly call home. "I feel it too," she admitted. "This is the first place that has felt like more than just temporary shelter. It feels like it could be home." The moment was interrupted, as such moments often are in stories of great consequence, by the sudden blaring of the pack's warning horn, echoing across the training yard below. Both Damon and Elena turned sharply toward the sound, and within moments Marcus was rushing up the stairs toward them, his expression grim. "Riders approaching from the eastern border," Marcus reported breathlessly. "Owen sent word ahead. It's Victor, Damon. He's brought a significant force with him, and he's demanding an audience at the border immediately." Damon's entire demeanor shifted instantly, the warmth of moments before replaced by the hardened focus of a leader facing potential conflict. "How many?" he asked. "At least 30 warriors, by Owen's count," Marcus replied. "Far more than would be needed for a simple diplomatic visit." "This is not diplomacy," Damon said grimly. "This is a show of force." He turned to Elena, his expression torn between the need to address the threat and his reluctance to leave her unprotected. "I need you to stay within the palace walls, Elena. Take Toby and Grace to the safe room beneath the kitchens. I will not risk Victor finding any opportunity to reach you while I deal with this." "Damon," Elena began, wanting to argue, but he cut her off gently. "Please," he said, cupping her face in his hands for just a moment. "I cannot focus on protecting this territory if I am worried about your safety at the same time. Trust me to handle this, and trust that I will return to you." Elena nodded reluctantly, and Damon pressed a brief, urgent kiss to her forehead, before hurrying off with Marcus to organize his warriors for whatever confrontation awaited at the border. Elena found Toby already anxious in the main hall, having heard the warning horn himself, and together with Grace, they made their way down to the safe room beneath the kitchens, a reinforced chamber built into the palace's foundation for exactly such emergencies. Toby clung tightly to Elena's hand as they descended, his small face pale with fear. "Is the king going to be okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Damon is strong and smart," Elena said, trying to keep her own fear from showing in her voice for the boy's sake. "He has faced difficult situations before, and he has an entire pack of warriors standing beside him." They settled into the small chamber, lit only by a single lantern Grace had carried down with them, and the three of them waited in tense silence, straining to hear any sounds from above that might indicate what was happening at the border. Elena's mind raced with worry, imagining every possible outcome, most of them far worse than she wanted to consider. Hours seemed to pass, though it was likely closer to only one, before they finally heard footsteps approaching the safe room door, quick and urgent. Elena tensed, unsure whether to expect good news or bad, until the door opened to reveal Owen, dust and sweat covering his face but otherwise unharmed. "It's over," Owen said, relief evident in his voice. "Victor's forces have withdrawn. There was no fighting, thankfully." Damon negotiated a resolution. Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her, though it was quickly followed by curiosity about how such a tense standoff could have ended without violence. "What happened?" she asked, rising to her feet along with Toby and Grace. "Damon confronted Victor directly at the border, backed by our full warrior contingent," Owen explained, as he led them back up toward the main hall. "Victor claimed he had come merely to reiterate his marriage proposal in person, but it was clear from his numbers that he intended intimidation at the very least. Damon made it plain that any aggressive move against our territory or against Elena specifically would be treated as an act of war, and that our pack, though smaller, would defend itself fiercely rather than yield to threats." "And Victor simply left?" Elena asked, skeptical. "Not before making one final statement," Owen said, his expression turning grave. "He warned that this would not be the last attempt, that he considers the Ashford territory rightfully due for expansion into his influence, one way or another. But faced with the unified strength of our warriors, and Damon's unwavering resolve, he withdrew for now, rather than risk immediate conflict he was not fully prepared to win." They found Damon in the main hall shortly after, still dressed in the reinforced leather armor he wore for such confrontations, deep in conversation with several of his senior warriors about strengthening border patrols in the coming weeks. The moment he saw Elena enter, however, he excused himself and crossed the room quickly, pulling her into a tight embrace that spoke of relief far deeper than his composed exterior had let on during the crisis itself. "You're safe," he murmured against her hair. "That's all that matters right now." "You're safe too," Elena replied, holding him just as tightly. "Owen told us what happened. You stood up to him, without a single warrior losing their life today." "For now," Damon said grimly, pulling back slightly to meet her eyes. "But Victor is not a man who accepts defeat easily. This confrontation has only delayed the inevitable, not resolved it entirely. We will need to remain vigilant." That night, exhausted from the day's tension but unwilling to be apart after such a close brush with potential disaster, Elena and Damon sat together on the same balcony where his wolf had first curled beside her weeks before. The moon hung full and bright above them, casting silver light across the peaceful grounds below, a stark contrast to the danger that had threatened them only hours earlier. "I've been thinking," Damon said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "about everything Winifred told us regarding the bond, and about what happened today. When I stood at that border facing Victor's forces, my greatest fear was not for myself, or even for the safety of this territory. It was the thought of losing you before we had the chance to fully explore what exists between us." Elena reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I felt the same fear, sitting in that safe room, imagining every terrible possibility, while I waited for news. I don't want to wait any longer to acknowledge what my wolf recognized from the very beginning," Damon continued, turning to face her fully. "Elena, I believe you are my fated mate, and after everything we have faced together in these past weeks, I no longer want to fight against that truth, out of fear born from past betrayals that have nothing to do with who you are. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes, though they were tears of overwhelming emotion, rather than sadness. I want this too, she said softly. I want to stop wandering from place to place, with no home to call my own. I want to build something real here, with you, with Toby, with this pack that has shown me more kindness than I ever expected to find again. Their lips met in a gentle, tender kiss beneath the moonlight, sealing an unspoken promise between them that neither Victor's threats nor any lingering fears from the past would be permitted to shatter what they had found together. Yet even as they allowed themselves this moment of hope and connection, both understood that Victor's warning still hung over them, a shadow of future conflict that would need to be addressed before their happiness could truly be considered secure. In the days that followed, Damon doubled the border patrols and asked Owen to personally oversee additional training drills for the warriors, preparing for the possibility that Victor might attempt something bolder than a simple show of force. Elena, for her part, found herself drawn into these preparations as well, offering to help organize supplies and coordinate communication between the kitchen staff and the warriors stationed at various points around the territory. Toby, ever eager to feel useful, took it upon himself to become something of a messenger between different parts of the palace, relaying information from Grace's kitchen to wherever it was needed most. Damon had initially hesitated to allow the boy such responsibility, given the tension surrounding Victor's threats, but Toby had argued so passionately about wanting to help protect the home and people he loved that Damon eventually relented, with strict instructions for the boy to remain within the palace walls at all times. It was nearly a week after Victor's confrontation at the border when the true test finally arrived, though not in the manner anyone had anticipated. Elena awoke suddenly in the middle of the night, an instinctive alertness pulling her from sleep before she even understood why. She lay still for a moment, listening, and soon heard what her subconscious had apparently already detected, the soft but distinct sound of someone moving through the palace hallways who should not have been there. She rose quietly and made her way to her door, easing it open just enough to peer into the corridor beyond. In the dim light, she spotted two unfamiliar figures moving stealthily toward the wing, where Toby's room was located, their movements careful and deliberate, in a way that immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. These were not palace guards making their rounds. Her heart pounding, Elena knew she had only seconds to act. She could scream for help, but that risked alerting the intruders before anyone could respond in time, potentially endangering Toby further. Instead, she slipped from her room as silently as possible and hurried in the opposite direction toward Damon's quarters, praying she would reach him in time. She burst through his door without knocking, and Damon shot upright immediately, alert in an instant, despite having been deeply asleep only moments before. Intruders, Elena gasped, heading toward Toby's room, 2 of them at least. Damon was moving before she finished speaking, and Elena watched in stunned amazement as his transformation began, faster and more controlled than anything she had witnessed before. Within seconds, the great dark wolf stood before her, fully formed and radiating a fierce, protective energy that made the air in the room seem to crackle with tension. This time, there was no hesitation in the wolf's amber eyes, no uncertainty about its purpose. It looked directly at Elena, a silent communication passing between them, before turning and bolting from the room with a speed that seemed to blur the space around it. Elena raced after him, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone floor, her heart hammering against her ribs, as fear for Toby's safety overrode every other concern. By the time she reached the corridor leading to the boys' room, she found chaos already erupting. Damon's wolf had cornered the 2 intruders against the wall, teeth bared, a low, dangerous growl rumbling from deep within its chest that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hallway. One of the intruders drew a dagger, clearly intending to fight rather than surrender, but before he could make a move, Owen and 2 other warriors rounded the corner, drawn by the commotion, and quickly overwhelmed both attackers, wrestling them to the ground and securing them before any real harm could occur. Elena rushed past the confrontation to Toby's door, throwing it open to find the boy huddled in the corner of his room, having woken from the noise, his eyes wide with terror but otherwise unharmed. She gathered him into her arms immediately, holding him tightly as his small body trembled against hers. "You're safe," she murmured into his hair, "You're safe, Toby. I've got you." "I heard growling," Toby whispered. "I was so scared." "That was Damon," Elena explained gently. "He came to protect you the moment he learned you were in danger." Once the immediate crisis had passed, and the two captured intruders were secured for questioning, the full scope of the situation became clear. Under Marcus's careful interrogation, both men eventually confessed to being sent by Victor, with orders to kidnap the young pup living within the Ashford territory, intending to use the boy as leverage to force Damon into accepting the marriage alliance he had already firmly rejected. The revelation left Damon, now returned to his human form, and dressed once more, visibly shaken with anger at the audacity of the scheme. He would use an innocent child as a bargaining chip, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury, as he paced the length of his study late into the night. Elena and Marcus both present to discuss the implications of this failed attack. "This changes everything," Marcus said grimly. "Victor has crossed a line that cannot be ignored or negotiated around. Attempting to kidnap a child within our own walls is an act of open aggression that demands a response." "I agree," Damon said, his resolve hardening. "Send word to our allied packs immediately. I want them informed of Victor's actions, and prepared to offer support should further conflict become necessary. Victor needs to understand definitively that this territory, and everyone within it, will be protected by whatever means required." As the immediate danger settled into a tense but manageable situation, with additional guards now posted specifically around Toby's room, and increased security measures implemented throughout the palace, Elena found a quiet moment to sit with Damon in his study, both of them processing the events of the night. "Your wolf protected him without hesitation," Elena said softly. "There was no confusion, no separation between your will and its actions. It knew exactly what needed to be done. Because for the first time, I was fully present with it," Damon said, reaching for her hand. "The bond between us has strengthened enough that my wolf no longer feels the need to act independently in secret. When there was a genuine threat, when Toby's safety was at stake, my wolf and I moved as one, completely unified in purpose." Elena felt a swell of emotion at this realization, understanding now more fully what Winifred had meant about trust healing the separation between man and wolf. The instinctive, secretive acts of hiding shoes had been born from uncertainty and fear, but tonight, faced with genuine danger, that same wolf had acted with complete clarity and control, protecting a child it clearly loved as much as Damon himself did. "Toby is safe because of both of you," Elena said. "The man and the wolf, working together." Damon nodded, pulling her closer. "And you are the reason that unity became possible at all. Whatever comes next with Victor, I face it now with far greater strength than I possessed even a week ago, because I no longer carry the burden of fighting my own instincts alongside everything else." Outside the study window, the night sky had begun to lighten toward dawn, the darkest hours of crisis giving way slowly to the promise of a new day. Though the threat from Victor remained unresolved, though difficult conversations with allied packs still lay ahead, Elena felt a quiet confidence settling over her that had been entirely absent during her 2 years of wandering alone. She had found not only safety within these walls but purpose, family, and a bond that had proven itself worthy of trust in the moment it mattered most. Word of Victor's attempted kidnapping spread quickly among the allied packs once Damon's messengers delivered the news, and the response was swift and decisive. Within days, representatives from 3 neighboring territories arrived at the Ashford Palace, each pledging their support should Victor attempt any further aggression against Damon's people. The unified front presented a formidable challenge to Victor's ambitions, one that even a man as stubborn and calculating as he was could not easily dismiss. Elena watched from the sidelines as Damon met with these allied leaders in the main hall, impressed by the respect and loyalty he commanded, despite the relatively small size of his own pack, compared to some of the larger territories represented. It became clear over the course of these discussions that Damon's father had built strong, genuine alliances during his time as Alpha King, bonds that had endured even through the difficult years following his passing, and that Damon himself had continued to nurture and strengthen since taking on the mantle of leadership. "Victor has overplayed his hand," one of the visiting alphas remarked during a break in the formal discussions, a broad-shouldered man named Gareth who led a territory to the north. "Attempting to kidnap a child is not the act of a confident leader building legitimate alliances. It is the desperate move of a man who knows his influence is waning and is grasping for any advantage he can find. What do you suggest we do? Damon asked. A unified message, Gareth said. All 4 of our territories, standing together at Victor's border, making it absolutely clear that any further aggression toward the Ashford territory will be met with combined resistance from all of us. Men like Victor understand strength above all else. Show him overwhelming strength, and he will retreat, at least for now. The plan was set into motion within days, and Elena found herself once again waiting anxiously within the palace, while Damon rode out with the combined forces of 4 allied territories toward Victor's border. This time, however, her wait was accompanied by a quiet confidence rather than desperate fear, knowing that Damon faced this confrontation not alone but backed by genuine allies who valued his leadership and friendship. Toby stayed close to her side throughout the tense hours of waiting, having grown even more attached to both Elena and Damon following the frightening events of the attempted kidnapping. Grace kept them both occupied with small tasks in the kitchen, understanding that busy hands helped ease anxious minds, and by the time evening arrived, Elena had nearly convinced herself that no news was simply a sign of ongoing negotiations rather than any cause for alarm. When Damon finally returned that evening, riding through the palace gates alongside Marcus and Owen, his expression carried the weary satisfaction of a difficult task successfully completed. Elena rushed to meet him as he dismounted, searching his face for any sign of what had transpired. "It's done," Damon said, pulling her into a relieved embrace. Victor withdrew his claims entirely, once he saw the combined strength arrayed against him. He signed a formal agreement acknowledging our territory's sovereignty and promising no further aggression, witnessed and guaranteed by all 4 allied leaders present. He simply gave up? Elena asked, somewhat surprised given everything they had endured. Men like Victor rarely give up their ambitions entirely, Damon said, his tone thoughtful. But he understood clearly today that pursuing them through force or deception would cost him far more than any potential gain. For now, at least, our territory, and everyone within it, are safe from his schemes. The relief that swept through the palace that evening was palpable, and a modest celebration was organized in the main hall, with Grace preparing an especially generous spread of food, and the pack warriors sharing stories and laughter that had been notably absent during the tense weeks of uncertainty. Toby, thrilled by the festive atmosphere, spent the evening running between tables, accepting congratulations and treats from warriors who had grown fond of the boy's earnest enthusiasm. Later that night, once the celebrations had wound down and the palace had settled into peaceful quiet, Elena found herself once again on the familiar balcony, watching the stars scattered across the clear night sky. Damon joined her there, the events of recent weeks seeming to have aged him slightly, though his eyes held a lightness that had been absent since the earliest days of their acquaintance. With Victor's threat resolved, Damon said, settling beside her, I find myself facing a different kind of uncertainty, one that has nothing to do with rival pacts or political schemes, and everything to do with what I hope for our future together. Elena turned to face him fully, her heart beginning to race with anticipation. What do you hope for? She asked softly. I hope you will choose to stay here permanently, Damon said, his voice earnest and unguarded, in a way she had rarely seen from him. Not because my wolf hides your shoes, not because circumstances have left you with nowhere else to go, but because you genuinely want this life, this territory, this family we have begun building together, with Toby and Grace and everyone else who has come to care for you. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes as she considered his words, thinking back over the tumultuous weeks since her arrival, the fear and uncertainty that had marked her first days here, and the profound transformation that had taken place since. She thought of Toby's bright smile whenever she entered a room, of Grace's warm guidance in the kitchen, of the quiet strength and growing tenderness she had discovered in Damon himself, and of the strange, wonderful bond that had brought them together against all odds. I choose this, Elena said firmly, taking both of Damon's hands in hers. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I want to be. This palace, this pack, this life with you. It has become more than shelter or safety. It has become home, in every sense of the word. Damon's expression transformed with unmistakable joy at her words, and he pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Then let us make it official, he said softly. Let us complete the bond my wolf recognized from the very first moment you arrived in this territory, and let us build a future together, free from fear and secrecy, grounded in trust and genuine choice. Elena nodded, her heart full to overflowing, with an emotion she had not allowed herself to feel in the 2 long years since losing her original pack. Hope. Genuine, unguarded hope for a future she had once believed impossible to find. As they stood together on that balcony, the moon casting its familiar silver light across the peaceful grounds below, both understood that the difficult chapter of uncertainty and threat had finally closed, making way for a new beginning, built on the solid foundation of trust they had worked so hard to establish. The shoes that had once mysteriously disappeared now sat undisturbed in Elena's closet each night, no longer needed as instinctive insurance against her leaving, replaced instead by a choice made freely and joyfully, with open eyes and an open heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as tomorrows always did, but for tonight, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the vast and star-scattered sky, Elena and Damon allowed themselves simply to exist in the quiet satisfaction of a bond finally realized, a home finally found, and a future finally within reach. The morning of the bonding ceremony arrived bright and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed almost designed to celebrate new beginnings. Word had spread quickly through the territory, once Damon announced his intention to formally claim Elena as his mate, and pack members from every corner of their lands had traveled to the palace grounds to witness the occasion, filling the courtyard with a warmth and energy that Elena found both overwhelming and deeply moving. Grace had taken it upon herself to oversee Elena's preparations that morning, fussing over every detail with the pride of someone who had watched this romance unfold from its earliest, most uncertain beginnings. The dress Elena wore had been carefully made over the past week by several of the pack's skilled seamstresses, a simple but elegant garment, in soft cream fabric, that caught the morning light beautifully as Elena moved. "You look radiant, dear," Grace said, adjusting a stray strand of Elena's hair with gentle hands. "Who would have thought, when you first arrived here looking half-starved and terrified of your own shadow, that we would be standing here today, preparing you for this?" "I certainly never imagined it," Elena admitted, studying her reflection in the small mirror Grace had provided. 2 years of wandering with no home, and now this. "Sometimes the path to where we belong takes unexpected turns," Grace said wisely. "But it seems you have found exactly where you were always meant to be." A soft knock interrupted their conversation, and Toby's excited face appeared in the doorway, dressed in a small formal outfit that had clearly been chosen with great care, his hair combed neatly for the occasion. "Everyone's ready," he announced breathlessly. "Marcus says it's time." Elena's heart fluttered with a mixture of nervousness and joy as she made her way through the palace and out into the courtyard, where the assembled pack waited in respectful silence. At the front of the gathering stood Damon, dressed in formal attire that emphasized his commanding presence, his dark eyes finding hers immediately as she stepped into view. The warmth in his expression eased any remaining nervousness she carried, replacing it with quiet certainty about the choice she was about to make official before their entire community. Winifred stood beside Damon, having been asked to oversee the traditional ceremony given her deep knowledge of pack customs and bonding rituals. As Elena approached and took her place facing Damon, the old healer began the ceremony with words that had been spoken at countless bondings throughout the pack's long history, words about trust, partnership, and the sacred connection between a wolf and its fated mate. "Do you, Elena Whitmore, choose to bind your life and your future to Damon Ashford, freely and without reservation, accepting both the man and the wolf as your partner in all things?" Winifred asked, her pale eyes steady on Elena's face. "I do," Elena said, her voice clear and unwavering, carrying easily across the silent courtyard. "I choose this freely, with my whole heart." "And do you, Damon Ashford, choose to bind your life and your future to Elena Whitmore, freely and without reservation, accepting her as your equal partner, and protecting the bond your wolf recognized as sacred and true?" "I do," Damon said, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "I choose this freely, and I promise to honor this bond every day for the rest of our lives together." As the traditional vows concluded, Damon reached for Elena's hand, and together they completed the final, most sacred part of the bonding ceremony, a gesture that sealed their connection, not only in the eyes of their community, but in the deeper, instinctive language that wolves had used to recognize their mates for countless generations. A warmth spread through Elena's entire body as the bond settled into place, a sensation of rightness and completion that she had never experienced before, as though some previously unknown piece of herself had finally clicked into position. The courtyard erupted into joyful celebration as the ceremony concluded, pack members cheering and offering their congratulations, as Damon pulled Elena into a tender kiss that sealed their union in the most timeless way possible. Toby, unable to contain his excitement any longer, rushed forward the moment they separated, wrapping his arms around both of them in an enthusiastic hug that made the surrounding crowd laugh warmly. "Does this mean Elena is really staying forever now?" Toby asked, looking up at them both with hopeful eyes. "Forever," Elena confirmed, kneeling down to meet his gaze directly. "This is your home, and mine, and we will build our future here together, all of us." The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing filling the palace grounds in a display of joy that felt like a genuine release after the weeks of tension and uncertainty that had preceded it. Elena found herself surrounded throughout the day by well-wishes from pack members she had grown to know over her months in the territory, each conversation reinforcing the sense of belonging she had once believed she would never find again after losing her original pack. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Elena found a quiet moment alone with Damon near the edge of the celebration, both of them taking a brief respite from the joyful chaos to simply appreciate how far they had come since that first frightened night when shoes had mysteriously vanished from her room. "Do you remember," Elena said, leaning against him contentedly, "when you told me your wolf might have simply been protecting me, without either of us understanding why?" "I remember," Damon said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It seems he understood far more than either of us gave him credit for at the time." "He knew you needed me," Elena said softly, "just as much as I needed you, even before either of us was ready to admit it." Nearby, Toby had fallen asleep on a blanket spread near the edge of the courtyard, exhausted from the day's excitement, while Grace kept a watchful eye over him, occasionally glancing toward the newly bonded couple, with an expression of deep satisfaction at having witnessed their journey from uncertain beginning to joyful conclusion. Marcus and Owen stood together near the refreshment tables, discussing pack matters even amid the celebration, though their conversation carried none of the tension that had characterized the difficult weeks of Victor's threats. The territory that had once felt uncertain and fragile now stood strengthened by genuine alliances, by a leader who had learned to trust both his own instincts and the people around him, and by a bond between mates that had proven itself worthy through fire and fear, before finally being allowed to flourish freely. Elena thought back to the frightened, exhausted woman who had arrived at these gates months ago with nothing but the clothes on her back, and marveled at how completely her life had transformed since then. As night fully descended over the palace grounds, stars emerging one by one across the darkening sky, Damon turned to Elena with a soft smile, echoing sentiments that felt both new and timeless all at once. "Welcome home," he said simply. "I am home," Elena replied, her heart full and at peace for the first time in longer than she could remember. Finally, truly home. Around them, the celebration continued, a testament to a pack made stronger through honesty, courage, and love, and to a family found, not through blood, but through choice, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a king, his wolf, and the woman who had completed them both.